Greetings to all our viewers tuning into our channel. If this is your first time here, please hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our deep dive analyses on the shifting tides shaping both the region and the world. The breaking news came on an April morning in 2025. CNN reported on a highly usual phone call between President Donald Trump and Jeff Bezos, the founder and driving force behind Amazon. But this wasn't a courtesy call. It was a political storm. According to leaked sources, Trump exploded with anger upon learning that Amazon was preparing to roll out a bold, unprecedented change, displaying right next to each product's price the exact amount being added due to his tariff policies. A small figure, seemingly harmless, yet politically explosive. For the first time, Americans would see clearly who was truly pushing up the cost of their goods, the government or the corporations. Inside the White House, the move was seen as a political attack on the president. But to Amazon, it was purely an act of self-defense. They couldn't afford to let hundreds of millions of customers blame them for soaring prices when the real knife wielder was Washington's tariff policy. On one side stood political power, on the other, global commercial might. And at the heart of this clash, a critical question emerged. Who really controls the prices Americans pay every day? The government with its lawmaking power, or Amazon with its grip on consumer behavior. From that tense phone call, a full-blown storm began to form. The media quickly dubbed it the Amazon crisis of 2025, a moment when e-commerce, long considered a basic part of American life, suddenly became a political battleground. But this wasn't just about one company or one president. It was a mirror reflecting a much deeper tension. In a globalized world, do nations still have the power to control supply chains and prices, or have they already surrendered it to the tech giants? In the days that followed, public discourse exploded. People buzzed with debate, financial markets trembled, and economists warned, this may mark the beginning of a new era of global trade volatility. And all eyes turned to the root of the issue, the new tariff policy recently rolled out by President Trump. This policy wasn't just a collection of sterile numbers buried in custom spreadsheets. It was a direct hit to the wallets of every American household, to the survival strategies of companies like Amazon, and more broadly, to the stability of the entire global supply chain. From one private phone call, the whole world was shaken. The Amazon story had evolved beyond pricing. It had become a symbol of the collision between politics and commerce. And to truly grasp why it's so serious, we must go back to the very origin of the crisis. The massive tariff package unleashed by Donald Trump just weeks earlier, a policy that turned goods into weapons and trade into the next front line in the battle for global power. In April 2025, a decree signed in Washington sent shockwaves through the global market. Donald Trump, now in his second term, unveiled the largest tariff package since World War II. What initially looked like just a few percentage points buried in a dense legal document became a seismic blow once applied to millions of containers and billions of products. A flat 10% on all imports, a staggering 145% specifically on goods from China. Those cold, bureaucratic numbers quickly turned into a real-world storm. Prices for laptops, smartphones, clothing, even the sneakers that fill every American's closet, suddenly surged by 20 to 30% within just weeks. On television, Trump declared this a righteous war to protect American workers. He claimed the tariffs would force companies to bring factories back home, to restart idle production lines in places like Ohio and Michigan. That message resonated with a voter base long weary of losing jobs to Asia. But behind the polished political facade lay a far more complex reality. The U.S. economy has long been deeply intertwined with global supply chains. Every iPhone, every piece of clothing sold on Amazon is the product of hundreds of interconnected links, stretching from Shenzhen and Bangalore to Ho Chi Minh City. When one link is squeezed by tariffs, the entire machine starts to shake. Amazon, which commands nearly 40% of America's e-commerce market, became the most visible and immediate casualty. With every click of the Buy Now button, consumers were left wondering, why are prices rising so fast? They couldn't see the tense negotiations at customs, the bloated invoices swollen with new taxes, the containers stuck at sea. All they saw was the updated price tag on their screen. and most of the blame fell squarely on Amazon's shoulders. Inside the company, emergency meetings became routine. Financial executives calculated that if Amazon kept prices stable to preserve customer trust, the company could lose up to $5.7 billion in just 2 quarters. But if they raised prices to offset the costs, they risked losing tens of millions of customers. A tariff trap aimed at China had now caught one of America's most critical companies by the throat. The pressure rippled into the stock market. Within a week, Amazon's shares dropped 12%. Investment funds began to dump stock. Analysts warned that a confidence shock could drag down the entire e-commerce sector. People were starting to see tariffs weren't just a protectionist policy, they had become a weapon in the hands of the government. An invisible weapon with the destructive force of war, striking at wallets, consumer habits, and public trust. Even inside Amazon's fulfillment centers, the atmosphere had shifted. Workers whispered to each other about declining order volumes, delayed shipments, and reduced hours. The familiar beeping of barcode scanners echoed less frequently, like a melody running out of breath. Outside, Americans took to social media in outrage. Their child's school laptop had suddenly crossed the $1,000 mark. Their winter coat had jumped by over $100 in just a few weeks. As the pressure mounted, Amazon found itself at a crossroads. Should it keep absorbing the blows to protect pricing, bleeding billions in the process, or shift the burden onto consumers and risk a public backlash? This wasn't just a financial decision. It was an existential dilemma for a company now seen as the backbone of American consumption. And right here, the story turned a page. Amazon in a vice: hold the line or lose the people. Amazon had never faced a crisis like this before. In previous years, they had weathered plenty of controversies, from antitrust lawsuits to mounting pressure over warehouse working conditions. But never had the stakes felt so existential. Keep prices stable to protect customers, or raise them to preserve profits. 2 paths, each lined with thorns. Inside closed-door meetings at the Seattle headquarters, financial reports glowed with deep red numbers. If Amazon continued to absorb tariff costs without passing them on to consumers, the company stood to lose at least $5.7 billion in just 2 quarters. That hole wouldn't just shake profits. It could slow down the company's entire strategy for investing in technology, logistics, and even the growth of its cloud services division, AWS. But if they shifted the burden onto customers, Amazon risked losing trust, the most precious asset it had spent decades building. One senior female executive put it bluntly in a meeting: "We're standing in the jaws of a closing pair of scissors. Step back, we bleed. Step forward, we lose our heart." And truly, Amazon's situation resembled a ship caught between 2 icebergs. Any move they made would leave a long, splintering crack. As news of the tariff spread, Wall Street reacted with alarm. Within a week, Amazon's stock dropped 12%. Dozens of investment funds began dumping shares, and analysts issued dire warnings. If Amazon couldn't chart a clear path forward, the capital exodus could turn into a financial storm, one that might drag down the entire US e-commerce sector. Amazon's instability revealed a terrifying truth to the market. This wasn't just an online retailer. It was the backbone of the American economy. When Amazon trembled, millions of small businesses built on its platform began to shake too, from clothing sellers and book vendors to upstart tech companies. Strange signs began surfacing in Amazon's warehouses across the country. Orders were down, containers were piling up at ports, shifts were getting cut. Some employees even heard rumors that Amazon was considering shutting down several distribution centers to cut costs. For workers who saw their jobs as a lifeline to make ends meet, the anxiety only grew. The instability caused by tariff policy had now crept into every household, every utility bill, every grocery run. Consumers weren't sitting still either. A firestorm of criticism erupted on social media. Some accused Amazon of exploiting the tariffs to hike prices, while others blamed the government, saying the White House had cornered the American people into paying the price. The growing polarization in public opinion only made things harder for Amazon. If they kept prices steady, they could preserve trust, but at the cost of a massive financial wound. If they raised prices, they could stay afloat, but risk losing the loyalty of hundreds of millions of customers. At that moment, Amazon was like a tightrope walker crossing a cable stretched over a canyon. One wrong step, and what would fall wouldn't just be revenue, but trust, a currency that no amount of money could buy back. Even Jeff Bezos, long since stepped out of the spotlight, was rumored to have joined emergency meetings. He knew this wasn't just a business equation, it was a battle for the soul of the brand. And then, a new solution was put on the table. Instead of staying trapped in the tariff snare, why not redraw the entire supply chain map? If the costs of manufacturing in China had become unsustainable, maybe it was time to abandon Shenzhen, Shanghai, Guangzhou, once the beating heart of Amazon's production, and seek new harbors. Mexico, India, and Vietnam quickly rose as emergency contenders. At first, the idea sounded like a wild logistical migration, but the more they analyzed it, the more it made sense. Amazon realized that to escape the vise of tariffs, sitting still and crunching losses wasn't enough. They needed a historic pivot, a swift, sweeping exodus. And that was the moment the great supply chain migration began to take shape, ushering in a new chapter of the Amazon 2025 crisis, the flight from China. Life and death decisions are rarely made in lavish boardrooms. They're made in sleepless nights when financial reports start to resemble nightmares. For Amazon, that moment arrived in early summer 2025. Tariffs came crashing down like a razor-sharp blade, slicing through every financial plan. And to survive, the company had to do something once thought unthinkable: flee China, once considered the untouchable workshop of the world. Within just a few weeks, contracts worth tens of billions of dollars with factories in Shenzhen, Guangzhou, and Xiamen were either canceled or frozen. The familiar image of thousands of Amazon-branded containers lined up at Shanghai's port began to vanish, as if playing in reverse. In their place, a new supply flow began to emerge. From Monterrey in Mexico, from Bangalore and Chennai in India, from Cat-Lai Port in Ho Chi Minh City, fresh shipments began to replace the broken links in Amazon's supply chain. It was a rewiring of the global trade map, so rapid that even seasoned experts had to admit, never in modern history had a supply chain migration unfolded with such speed. Mexico became the first savior. With its proximity to the US border, goods could reach American markets in days rather than weeks across the Pacific. In Monterrey's industrial zones, electronics, home appliances, and consumer goods factories suddenly saw an explosion of Amazon orders. Workers who were once used to temporary contracts were now being hired en masse, with wages rising by 50% in just a few months. The entire city buzzed with the electricity of a historic opportunity. India, long known as the world's back office, stepped into a new role: direct manufacturing powerhouse. Assembly lines in Bangalore and Hyderabad began producing not just tech devices, but also household items and apparel, categories that had previously been tied to China. The Indian government seized the moment, launching a multi-billion-dollar incentive package to attract Amazon, branding the move as a geopolitical win over Beijing. And Vietnam, the rising star of Southeast Asia, transformed itself into a second Shenzhen. Within 8 weeks, Amazon chartered flights carrying engineers and logistics specialists landed non-stop in Tan Son Nhat, Haiphong, and Da Nang. Industrial parks in Bac Ninh, Binh Duong, and Dong Nai lit up through the night to meet the avalanche of orders. Images of assembly lines churning out phones, headphones, clothing at full capacity spread across international media, dubbed with a symbolic name: the Great Exodus from China. But while Mexico, India, and Vietnam reaped the rewards of this migration, a far different story was unfolding inside America. The breakneck shift left many U.S. ports, long reliant on Chinese imports, eerily quiet. Los Angeles, Long Beach, once the great gateways of trans-Pacific trade, lost significant portions of container traffic. Massive cranes stood still. Truck yards lay empty. Dock workers were sent home as shifts were slashed. A bitter contrast emerged. While Monterrey hummed with machines and Ho Chi Minh City glowed through the night, in California and New Jersey, thousands of American workers walked away from silent ports, eyes hollow with uncertainty. People began to ask, were tariffs really protecting American jobs as promised, or were they, unintentionally, driving those opportunities out of the country faster than ever? And so, what began as an involuntary exodus from China unleashed a new set of consequences right at home. Cracks started to show in America itself, where once bustling ports and warehouses slipped into silence. This was the next piece of the crisis puzzle. a global restructuring that echoed as emptiness within the heart of the United States. In the summer of 2025, before the sun had even touched the West Coast, an eerie stillness had already settled over America's busiest seaports. Los Angeles and Long Beach, once the bustling gateways of global trade, now sat in unsettling silence. The massive cranes that had once moved relentlessly day and night stood frozen like silent steel monuments. On the container yards, what used to be a dense maze of stacked cargo now revealed vast, empty gaps. Fewer trucks rolled in. The roads leading to the ports grew quiet, and the longshore workers, once cycling through endless shifts, now spent hours waiting for job assignments, only to be sent home with a disappointed shake of the head. A 20% drop in container volume over just a few months wasn't just a dry statistic, it told a story of lives upended. Tens of thousands of workers in transportation, logistics, and warehouse operations lost their jobs or saw their hours slashed. At the cafes near the docks, the usual banter and laughter had faded. In their place were hushed, worried conversations about rent payments, kids' tuition, and looming loan deadlines. The orange reflective vests, once a symbol of American labor, now hung quietly on hooks, a somber reminder that the promise of protecting jobs was slipping away faster than ever. In the vast warehouses that once echoed with the beep of barcode scanners, now there was only silence. So quiet that footsteps could be heard bouncing off the walls. Amazon had long prided itself on its sprawling logistics network, but now many of its facilities were scaling down operations, some even facing the threat of closure. Each decision to lay off a few hundred workers cut deep into the trust of local communities where Amazon had once stood as a symbol of stability and prosperity. And yet, while America endured these painful silences, across the border and around the globe, the soundscape was completely different. In Monterrey and Tijuana, Mexico, assembly lines ran at full speed, humming with the noise of looms, hammers, and welders echoing late into the night. In Ho Chi Minh City and Haiphong, factory lights blazed like cities that never slept. In Bangalore and Chennai, job applicants lined up outside plants, eager to join a manufacturing sector being reborn. It was a bitter contrast. In America, workers scrambled for employment, while in Mexico, workers couldn't put in enough overtime. In California, warehouses were quiet. In Vietnam, factories pulsed with life. In the US, families braced for shrinking paychecks. In India, families celebrated newfound job security. Every shipment leaving Katmai or Veracruz was living proof that the global trade balance was shifting, and that the US, despite being the architect of these policies, was now being left behind in the very game it had set in motion. To many American workers, the promise to bring jobs back now felt like a vanishing mirage. The new factories springing up in Mexico, Vietnam, and India were indeed bringing jobs back. Just not back to America. They were merely changing direction, flowing into rising economies where labor was cheaper, incentives were sweeter, and a new supply chain was being rebuilt at breakneck speed. From the hushed ports of California to the glowing industrial zones of Asia, the world was witnessing a historic shift. A new trade map was being redrawn day by day, with fresh centers of gravity emerging in Mexico, Vietnam, and India. And from this piece of the puzzle, the story turns to a new chapter: the rise of the new manufacturing powers, where three economies are stepping forward, reshaping the order of the global supply chain. The global trade map had never shifted as quickly as it did in 2025. In just a matter of months, the shipping routes, logistics hubs, and massive factories once tightly bound to China were suddenly replaced by new names. Mexico, Vietnam, and India, three economies that had long played supporting roles, were now rising to become central pillars in the global supply chain. South of the US border, Mexico emerged as Amazon's emergency lifeline. Monterrey and Tijuana were more vibrant than ever. Industrial parks sprang up in rapid succession, with electronics, apparel, and home goods factories operating around the clock. Geography gave Mexico a decisive edge. Within days, goods could cross the border and reach the US, slashing delivery times that once took weeks across the Pacific. Mexican workers, long accustomed to short-term contracts and low wages, now saw their incomes soar and job opportunities multiply. On the streets of Monterrey, hope shone brightly in the eyes of the thousands of newly hired laborers. Further east, India stepped into an entirely new role. A country once known as the global back office had become a direct manufacturing hub for Amazon. Cities like Bangalore, Chennai, and Hyderabad, long associated with software and IT, now buzzed with assembly lines producing phones, tablets, and household goods at full throttle. The Indian government, eager to position itself as a strategic counterweight to China, seized the moment, rolling out massive tax incentives, pouring investment into infrastructure, building new ports and highways. Every order rerouted from Shanghai to Bangalore wasn't just another contract won, it was a step toward claiming a stake in the emerging global trade order. And Vietnam, the rising gem of Southeast Asia, perhaps had the most remarkable transformation of all. From Bac Ninh and Haiphong in the north to Binh Duong and Dong Nai in the south, industrial zones lit up through the night. Workers pulled double shifts to fulfill Amazon's urgent orders. International media began dubbing Vietnam the new Shenzhen, a manufacturing hub for tech and textiles replacing China's southern powerhouse. Images of long lines of container trucks on highways, of assembly lines churning out headphones, laptops, and clothing 24/7 spread around the world, becoming a vivid symbol of a shift too powerful to reverse. Vietnam wasn't just attracting capital, it was climbing the value chain, moving from basic assembly to advanced tech manufacturing. More important than the pace was the permanence of this change. It was carving out a new balance of power. Where once the global supply chain revolved almost entirely around China, a new triangle was now emerging: Mexico, India, Vietnam. These three rising stars were connecting through shipping routes, trade agreements, and, most critically, the urgent needs of corporate giants like Amazon. But while this new world was taking shape in the United States, people were feeling the shift in a far different way. Trade maps, flowcharts, and billion-dollar investments may still feel abstract to many, but the cost of this transition was written clearly on every receipt. Laptops crossed the $1,000 mark. Refrigerators and washing machines jumped by several $100s. Even everyday sneakers had become a burden. For students, working families, and retirees, the global chessboard came down to a single, familiar experience: monthly shopping bills heavier than ever before. And that's where the story moves forward, to the next chapter, as American consumers are forced to confront the harsh reality that the numbers on their receipts never lie. If Amazon's boardrooms were filled with tense debates over strategy and the nation's ports and warehouses had grown eerily quiet as trade flows shifted course, then it was on the ground, in the daily lives of ordinary Americans, where the changes were felt most acutely, in the form of heavier bills. Gone were the abstract charts on TV, the academic think pieces. What remained were the cold, printed numbers on grocery receipts, online price tags, and monthly credit card statements. And those numbers don't lie. A standard laptop, once priced at $700 to $800, had now crossed the $1,000 threshold, forcing working-class families to think twice before buying a device for their child's education. Household appliances, refrigerators, washing machines, microwaves had surged by 20 to 30%, turning the dream of a kitchen upgrade into a distant luxury. Even the most basic items, children's clothing, sneakers, had seen dizzying price hikes. Americans, long used to abundant, affordable imports, now found themselves struggling to balance monthly expenses for the first time. In student dormitories, old laptops with dying batteries and broken keys were kept alive out of necessity. In working-class neighborhoods, families swapped tips on rare deals or resorted to buying used goods. Seniors on fixed incomes now faced painful choices: pay for medication or purchase everyday necessities that seemed to grow more expensive with each trip to the store. Across every social layer, the pressure was mounting, and no one was exempt. The irony was bitter. While American consumers tightened their belts under rising prices, in Europe and parts of Asia, prices remained relatively stable, and in some cases even declined thanks to more adaptable supply chains. Americans began to ask, why is it us, citizens of the world's largest economy, who are paying more for the same products than our friends abroad? That question echoed across online forums, dinner tables, and checkout lines at the grocery store. And slowly, a realization took hold. Protectionism wasn't just a campaign slogan. It came with a very real cost, one stamped clearly on every swipe of a debit card: Amazon, despite its attempts to be transparent by displaying tariff costs next to product prices, couldn't contain the growing frustration. Consumers didn't care who was to blame, the government or the corporations. They only knew that life was getting more expensive and harder. That anger, quiet but persistent, began to erode something deeper: social trust. Like rising tides, it crept into daily conversations, into moments of hesitation at the register, into the weight of every shopping decision. Every receipt, every item, every price tag became living proof of an inescapable truth. In this trade war, it was ordinary people who stood on the front lines. No shield could protect them from decisions made in the Oval Office or in the glass towers of megacorporations. They had only one choice: to pay more for less and to accept that the era of cheap consumption had come to an end. And from modest kitchens, crowded college classrooms, and cramped suburban apartments, Americans began to ask a bigger question. In this global power game, who's really winning? Is it the American people, the ones paying the price day after day? Or is it China, the supposed target, quietly finding new pathways to expand its influence? And what about Amazon, adapting with all its might? Is it truly the last one standing? These are the questions that opened up the next broader chapter, a global story, where the tariff war no longer just shaped the fate of a single company, but the very structure of the world economy itself. On the global trade chessboard of 2025, every nation made its move with calculated intent, but not all emerged victorious, despite the bold declarations. The United States, with its massive tariff package, had hoped to force the world to its knees. Yet just months later, the order of play had shifted in an unexpected direction. Rather than collapsing under pressure, China pivoted swiftly. Beijing accelerated its outreach into new markets: Africa, Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and even Europe. Rail lines connecting Xinjiang to Kazakhstan, seaports in Djibouti, Gwadar, and Piraeus suddenly sprang to life. China no longer depended on American consumers the way it once had. Instead, it expanded a new trade belt where goods continued to flow and the renminbi steadily gained ground. What Washington had intended as a devastating blow had instead fueled Beijing's growing influence beyond the Pacific. Meanwhile, the cost for America became increasingly visible. Once the undisputed hub of global consumption, the U.S. now faced the possibility of losing up to 1/5 of its share in global imports over the next decade. As supply chains restructured, jobs didn't return home as promised. They flowed instead to Mexico, Vietnam, and India. American workers felt abandoned, while the middle class buckled under the weight of rising bills. Rather than safeguarding the American dream, protectionist policies seemed to push it further out of reach. Amazon, the central figure in this crisis, didn't collapse as many had feared. The company adapted with ruthless efficiency, re-engineering supply chains, shifting production, and expanding contracts in emerging markets. It survived, even expanded its footprint in new regions. But that survival came with a trade-off: exporting jobs out of America, leaving behind a painful gap where the promise to protect American workers had once stood. Looking at the broader picture, a sobering truth comes into focus. There were no absolute winners. The U.S. believed it was defending its interests, but may have only weakened its position. China, no longer the dependent player, was becoming a new hub, with a sprawling network of markets and logistics. Amazon didn't fall, but it was forced to reinvent itself from the ground up. And the American consumer, the one group that was meant to be protected, ended up bearing the brunt of it all. In this era of hyper-globalized data and logistics, tariffs are like a dam trying to block a river. It may hold for a moment, but the tighter you clamp it, the more forcefully the water finds another way. And when the current changes course, the world changes with it. The only question that remains: does the U.S. have the courage to face that truth and adapt? Or will it keep building more tariff walls, even as trade power steadily slips into other hands? The Amazon 2025 story comes to a close, but its echoes still ring loud, a wake-up call for the entire world. This was never just a clash between a corporate giant and a powerful government. It was a mirror reflecting how political decisions can shake dinner tables, inflate receipts, and upend the most ordinary jobs of millions. A phone call between the US president and Jeff Bezos may have lasted only a few minutes, But what it set in motion was a chain of aftershocks across the planet, from California's ports to Monterey's factories, from Bakhnin's assembly lines to the shipping docks of Mumbai. The bigger question now is, where does America go from here? Will it continue to build more tariff walls, isolating itself further, or will it seek to construct supply chain bridges to reconnect with the world? Can the dream of American jobs truly be revived on home soil, or will it remain a political slogan recycled every election season? And more critically, does the US still have what it takes to lead the global economy as trade currents begin tilting toward new centers of gravity like Mexico, Vietnam, and India? Meanwhile, the rest of the world is entering an age of realignment. China, though cornered, found an escape route to expand its reach. Emerging economies seized the moment to leap forward and stake their claims. Amazon, a symbol of globalization, remained standing, but only by reinventing itself from the inside out. And above all, it is the people, from America to Asia, Africa to Europe, who will continue to bear the brunt or reap the rewards of these seismic shifts. Perhaps the Amazon 2025 saga is just one piece of a much larger puzzle, the defining puzzle of this century. A century in which power is no longer concentrated in a single nation, but is shared, contested, and constantly redefined through each economic tremor. And every decision, even a single line in a trade policy, can reshape the entire global landscape. Ladies and gentlemen, the future remains unwritten, but the question for us, for every viewer, every person following this story, is this: will America choose to be a bridge builder or a wall builder? Will trade be a tool of division or of connection? And will we, the consumers, accept paying the price for every political decision? Or will we demand a path that is fairer and more sustainable? If you found this analysis helpful, we invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective is a crucial piece of the puzzle as we try to understand the road ahead together. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next deep dive into the events shaping our world. Because tomorrow, a new policy, a breaking headline, could once again change the global game, and we'll all be there to witness it.